5 days in darkness. How I survived being trapped in a flooding cave when no one knew where I was. The moment my headlamp flickered for the third time, I knew I was in serious trouble. I checked my watch. Only 36 hours in, and already my main light source was failing. With the water now at chest level and rising, I couldn't stop the thought. I might die down here, alone in the darkness, and no one would even know where to look. Have you ever wondered what your last thoughts would be if you knew you were about to die? I never had. Until that moment. The descent. It was supposed to be a quick, solo exploration. A chance to clear my head after weeks of mounting pressure at work and the messy breakup with Emma that had left me questioning everything. The Stillwater cave system was well documented, or so I thought. I'd been through parts of it twice before with experienced guides. But this particular branch was new to me. I should have known better. Every caver knows the cardinal rules: never go alone, always tell someone your exact route, and always pack extra supplies. I'd broken all three. The morning started with light drizzle. Nothing unusual for October in Virginia. I'd checked the forecast briefly. Scattered showers, cooling temperatures, nothing alarming. What I didn't know was that a stalled weather system would turn those scattered showers into 3 days of continuous rainfall, with flash flood warnings that would light up phones across 3 counties hours after I lost reception. I parked my Subaru at the small trailhead lot around 7:30 a.m. A family was unloading hiking gear nearby, the parents helping 2 young kids into brightly colored rain jackets. "Heading into the caves?" the father asked, noticing my gear. "Yeah, just for a few hours," I replied, adjusting my helmet. "Need to get away from the world for a bit." He nodded knowingly. "We all need that sometimes. Safe travels." I didn't sign the trail register. Didn't tell anyone exactly which cave entrance I was planning to use. Didn't expect to be gone more than 6 hours. All decisions that would come back to haunt me. The hike to the cave entrance took 40 minutes, my boots squelching through increasingly muddy terrain. The entrance itself was unremarkable. A dark opening in a limestone outcropping, partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. I switched on my headlamp, ducked under the low ceiling, and left the gray daylight behind. The immediate temperature shift was pleasant after the humid hike. The stillness and silence of the cave wrapped around me like a blanket, instantly muffling the chaos of my thoughts. This was why I came. In the cave, nothing existed except the next step, the next handhold, the next passage. No breakups, no deadlines, no disappointments. I worked my way through the familiar initial passages, ducking under low ceilings and sliding through narrow gaps. Eventually, I reached what cavers called the letterbox, a tight, horizontal passage about 10 feet long that required removing your pack and pushing it ahead of you while crawling on your stomach, not for the claustrophobic. Once through, I entered the main gallery, a vast chamber with a ceiling so high my light couldn't reach it. Magnificent stalactites hung down like stone icicles, some thin as pencils, others thick as tree trunks. Water droplets clung to their tips, catching my light and sparkling like diamonds. I followed the established route toward the lower levels where an underground stream cut through the system. My goal was to reach a formation called the Crystal Pool, a still body of water about 2 miles in, famous among local cavers for its mineral deposits that created stunning crystalline structures. The first hint that something was wrong came about an hour and a half into my journey. A subtle shift in air pressure and a distant sound like gentle thunder. Most people would miss it entirely. But after years of caving, you develop sensitivity to these changes. I paused, tilting my head to listen more carefully. The sound was unmistakable. Moving water. more than what should be flowing through the cave's normal channels. Much more. I hesitated. The smart choice would have been to turn back immediately. But I was already more than halfway to my goal, and my stubbornness kicked in. Just a little further, I told myself. I'll reach the crystal pool, take a few photos, then head back. An extra 20 minutes, tops. Pride, stubbornness, self-deception. Call it what you will. I pressed on, descending through a series of tight switchbacks. The limestone was slick under my gloves, forcing me to test each handhold carefully. The distant rumble grew steadily louder. When I reached the junction that led to the crystal pool, I froze. Where there should have been a narrow passage with a small stream alongside, there was now a rush of muddy water covering the entire floor and rising. Reality hit me like a physical blow. The scattered showers had intensified into something much worse, and water was flooding the lower levels of the cave system. I turned immediately, abandoning my goal and focusing solely on getting out. But as I retraced my steps up the switchbacks, I realized the water was rising faster than I'd anticipated. The passage that had been merely damp when I descended was now ankle-deep, and the current was strengthening. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the growing roar. "Just keep moving up." I reached for my phone instinctively before remembering. No signal. No way to call for help. No way to check weather alerts. No one knew exactly where I was or when I should return. By the time I reached the main gallery again, I was moving as fast as safety allowed, which wasn't nearly fast enough. The chamber that had been dry just 2 hours before now had water flowing across its lowest sections. I kept to the higher ground around the edges, but I could see water pouring in from multiple points. Small waterfalls cascading from crevices in the walls where I hadn't even noticed openings before. The sound was overwhelming, a constant rushing punctuated by crashes as loosened ceiling material fell into the rising water. I checked my watch. 11:42 a.m. I'd been in the cave for just over 3 hours. If the rain outside continued at this rate, I might be racing a flood that would potentially fill all the lower passages. My exit route required passing through the letterbox again. As I approached it, my headlamp revealed my worst fear. Water was already beginning to fill the narrow tunnel. I stood there, watching my escape route slowly disappearing under muddy brown water. I had maybe minutes before it would be completely submerged. Decision time. I could try to force my way through now, risking getting trapped in a flooding tunnel, a death sentence. Or I could retreat to higher ground within the cave and hope the water would recede before my supplies ran out. My headlamp flickered briefly, reminding me of another looming problem. I checked my pack. 1 spare set of batteries, food for 1 day, 3 energy bars, a bag of trail mix, some beef jerky, 2 liters of water, a space blanket, basic first aid kit. The water was now halfway up the letterbox. "This is insane," I muttered, backing away from the passage. No matter how desperate I was to get out, swimming through that flooded horizontal tunnel would be suicide. I scanned the main gallery, looking for higher ground. About 20 feet up one wall, I spotted a ledge that appeared to lead to a smaller side chamber. If I could reach it, I'd be well above the current water level. The climb wasn't technically difficult. The wall offered plenty of handholds, but the rock was slippery from the increasing humidity. Twice my foot slipped, sending my heart into my throat. One bad fall in here, with no one knowing where I was, could be as deadly as the rising water. When I finally pulled myself onto the ledge, my arms were burning with exertion. The small chamber was dry and about the size of a modest bedroom. The ceiling was low enough that I couldn't quite stand upright. I shrugged off my pack and sat with my back against the wall, watching the water continue to rise in the gallery below. The ripples caught my light, reflecting dancing patterns on the stalactites. I checked my watch again. 12:37 p.m. Day 1 had just begun. The wait begins. The first priority was to assess my resources and ration accordingly. I might be here for a while. I inventoried my pack more carefully. Headlamp with current batteries, showing signs of weakness. 1 spare set of batteries, energy bars. 3, trail mix, about 2 cups. Beef jerky, half a package. Water bottle, 2 liters. Space blanket. First aid kit, basic. Multi-tool, waterproof matches, useless in this environment. Small notebook and pencil. Cave map, looking woefully inadequate now. Not enough for a long stay, but better than nothing. The most critical resource would be the light. In total darkness, psychological deterioration would become a serious threat. I decided to conserve the batteries by using the light for only 5 minutes every hour, just enough to check water levels and maintain my sanity. The rest of the time, I would sit in complete darkness. And so began the longest day of my life. Cave darkness isn't like normal darkness. It's absolute, primordial. You can wave your hand an inch from your face and see nothing. Your eyes strain for input until they start manufacturing their own. Phantom lights, swirling patterns, hallucinations at the edge of perception. With nothing but the sound of rushing water and my own breathing for company, time stretched in strange ways. Minutes felt like hours. During one of my brief light periods, I discovered something I'd missed. A narrow fissure at the back of my chamber. It was too small for a person to fit through, but I could feel air moving through it. In caves, moving air often indicates a connection to the outside world. Not necessarily a way out, but at least a sign that I wouldn't suffocate if the water rose high enough to trap me completely. The water in the main gallery continued to rise throughout that first afternoon, eventually reaching about 8 feet below my ledge before it seemed to stabilize. I had no way of knowing if this meant the rain had stopped, or just that the cave system had reached some kind of equilibrium between water flowing in and draining out. As evening approached, according to my watch, the temperature began to drop. Cave temperatures typically stay constant year-round, but with flood water bringing in outside air and changing the cave's microclimate, it felt significantly colder. I wrapped myself in the space blanket, its metallic surface crinkling loudly with every movement. Night and day mean nothing underground, but my watch told me when darkness fell outside. 8:17 p.m. I'd been in the cave for almost 12 hours. I allowed myself half an energy bar and careful sips of water. My stomach demanded more, but I forced myself to think logically. This might be a long wait. In the darkness, with nothing but the sounds of water and my own thoughts, my mind began to wander dangerously. I thought about Emma, about our last argument, about how trivial it all seemed now. I thought about my parents, who wouldn't expect to hear from me until Sunday's weekly call. I thought about my apartment, my job, my life that suddenly seemed so distant. Would anyone even notice I was missing before Monday when I failed to show up for work? Would they think to check the cave systems? How long before anyone even realized I wasn't just taking a weekend to myself? The questions circled endlessly, offering no comfort. I tried to sleep, using my pack as a makeshift pillow and curling up as comfortably as possible on the hard rock floor. Sleep came in brief bursts, interrupted by shivers, muscle cramps, or the occasional sound of rocks falling into water. Each time I woke, the complete darkness was disorienting, giving me momentary panic until I remembered where I was. By what my watch claimed was morning, 6:42 a.m. of day 2, I was shivering despite the space blanket. My clothes were damp from the high humidity, and the cool air was steadily pulling heat from my body. I needed to move. I allowed myself a full minute of light to examine my surroundings more carefully. The water had dropped perhaps 2 feet overnight, a good sign, but still nowhere near low enough to attempt the letterbox. The chamber I occupied had a ceiling height of about 4 feet and extended back about 15 feet from the ledge. I spent the next hour doing every exercise I could manage in the confined space. Modified push-ups, stretches, isometric holds. Anything to generate body heat and keep my muscles from seizing up. As I moved, I noticed a subtle change in the sound of air moving through the fissure at the back of the chamber. There seemed to be a stronger airflow now, carrying with it a faint scent that didn't belong to the cave. Vegetation, perhaps. The outside world. I switched on my light again and examined the crack more carefully. It was about 3 inches wide at its maximum, narrowing to less than an inch in places. Completely impassable for a human. But the moving air confirmed it connected to somewhere beyond my little prison. I tore a page from my notebook and folded it into a crude paper airplane. When I positioned it in the airflow from the fissure, it was immediately sucked in and disappeared. A childish experiment, perhaps, but it confirmed my theory. This crack connected to something beyond, potentially even the surface. Not a way out for me, but maybe. I took out another page and my pencil. In large block letters, I wrote, "Trapped in Stillwater Cave. Flooding. Need rescue. Mark C." I folded the paper as compactly as possible and wedged it into the crack, positioning it so the airflow would carry it forward. Then, I did the same with 5 more pages, each with variations of the same message, including what little I knew of my location in the cave system. A desperate move. But what did I have to lose? By midday of the second day, hunger was becoming a serious distraction. I'd rationed myself to half an energy bar and a small handful of trail mix. But my body was burning calories trying to stay warm. The water level had continued to drop slowly, now about 12 feet below my ledge, but still not enough to risk attempting the letterbox. I began calculating how long I might survive in these conditions. Humans can go 3 weeks without food, but the cold and stress would reduce that significantly. Water would become the critical factor. My 2 liters might stretch to 5 days with careful rationing. As these grim calculations occupied my mind, my headlamp began to dim noticeably. The batteries were failing faster than I'd expected. I switched to my spare set, knowing with sick certainty that when these died, I would be in complete darkness until rescue or death. Days blur together. Day 3 brought a new psychological test. The water level had risen again slightly overnight, eliminating the progress from the previous day. Had it rained again outside? Was I going to be trapped even longer than I'd feared? Hunger was now a constant companion, a hollow ache that made it difficult to focus. I'd reduced my food intake to the bare minimum, a few pieces of jerky and a small handful of trail mix per day. My 2-liter water bottle was half empty. The worst part was the silence. When I wasn't using my light, I sat in a perfect darkness and near perfect silence, broken only by the distant sound of water and occasional drips from the ceiling. The silence was so complete that I became aware of my own bodily sounds. Heartbeat, stomach growling, even the blood rushing in my ears. I began talking to myself just to hear a human voice. "You'll get through this, Mark," I would say aloud. "People have survived worse. Someone will notice you're missing. The water will recede. You just need to hold on." I wasn't entirely convinced, but the sound of words in the darkness was comforting nonetheless. To maintain some semblance of sanity, I established a routine. Exercise for warmth. Check water levels during light periods. Write in my notebook, both to document my experience and to leave a record if the worst happened. Ration food and water. Try to sleep. During one of my light periods on the 3rd day, I noticed something unusual. The water appeared to be changing color. What had been muddy brown was now clearer, with a greenish tint. I wasn't sure what this meant, but I took it as a sign that the flood water was being replaced by the cave's normal water flow. Potentially a good sign. By the evening of day 3, I was in rough shape. Dehydration was setting in despite my rationing. My lips were cracked, and I had a constant headache. Hunger had moved beyond discomfort to a kind of detached lightheadedness. Most concerning was the cold. I couldn't seem to get warm no matter how much I exercised or how tightly I wrapped myself in the space blanket. I was also fighting a growing sense of despair. 3 days, no signs of rescue, no way to know if anyone was even looking for me. The letterbox was still flooded, and my light would fail completely within another day. "Think, Mark," I whispered to myself in the darkness. "What would the survival experts do?" I decided to try fishing objects from my pack through the fissure, hoping they might eventually reach the surface or be found by other cavers. I tore pages from my notebook and wrapped them around small objects. My car keys, a bright orange carabiner from my pack, anything noticeable, with notes explaining my situation. Then I fed them into the crack, letting the air current carry them away. Would they travel 10 feet or 1,000? I had no idea, but the action gave me purpose. On the morning of the 4th day, I awoke from a fitful sleep to realize I was genuinely ill. My throat was raw, my head pounded, and I was alternating between chills and sweats. The cold, stress, and dehydration were taking their toll. The water level had dropped significantly overnight, now about 20 feet below my ledge. For the first time, I could see parts of the gallery floor emerging from the flood. If this continued, the letterbox might actually become passable again. Hope flickered briefly, then faltered as I realized another problem. My light was dimming again. The second set of batteries was failing much faster than the first. I might have 4 or 5 more brief periods of light before permanent darkness set in. I saved my light use for checking the water level, which continued to drop throughout the day. By what my watch said was late afternoon, I could see that the entrance to the letterbox was now completely exposed. Was it passable all the way through? I had no way to know without actually attempting it. And therein lay my dilemma. Wait for rescue that might never come, with my light about to fail and my condition deteriorating, or attempt to escape through a passage that might still be partially flooded or structurally compromised from the water. As night fell on the 4th day, I made my decision. At first light tomorrow, I would attempt to exit through the letterbox. Better to die trying than wait for the darkness to claim me completely. I spent that night in a strange state of calm, having made my choice. I allowed myself slightly larger portions of my dwindling supplies. No point in saving them if tomorrow was my final attempt. I wrote a last entry in my notebook, explaining my decision and leaving messages for my family just in case. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake in the absolute darkness, mentally preparing for the morning's attempt. The 5th day. I checked my watch compulsively throughout the night. When 6 a.m. arrived, I allowed myself the luxury of a full 2 minutes of light to survey the gallery below. The water had receded even further. The main floor was now mostly exposed, with only puddles and small streams remaining. The letterbox entrance was completely clear. This was my chance. I packed everything back into my bag, keeping only the multi-tool in my pocket. If I became stuck in the letterbox, I might need it. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. The climb down from my ledge was more difficult than the climb up had been. After 4 days of minimal food and water, my strength was significantly reduced. My limbs shook with exertion, and twice I nearly lost my grip. But eventually, my feet touched the main gallery floor. The rock was slick with mud, and the air smelled of mineral-rich silt and decay, the aftermath of the flood. I moved carefully toward the letterbox, testing each step on the treacherous surface. When I reached the entrance, I shone my weakening light into the horizontal tunnel. It appeared clear of water, but the floor was covered in several inches of mud. I'd need to slide through that muck for 10 feet in a space barely wider than my shoulders. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. Just 10 feet, then the main passage, then the exit. I removed my pack and pushed it ahead of me into the tunnel, then got down on my stomach and began to inch forward. The mud was cold and thick, instantly soaking through my clothes. The ceiling was even lower than I remembered, forcing me to keep my head turned sideways. I pushed with my toes and pulled with my fingertips, making painfully slow progress. Halfway through, disaster struck. My headlamp, which had been weakening steadily, gave one final flicker and died. I was plunged into absolute darkness, trapped in a mud-filled tube barely wider than my body. Panic surged through me. I fought to control my breathing, knowing that hyperventilating would only make the situation worse. I had to keep moving by feel alone. "Count to 10, I told myself, my voice tight with fear. "Just count and keep moving." I continued to slide forward, one excruciating inch at a time, feeling my way through the darkness. The mud seemed to grow thicker, more resistant. My lungs burned from the effort and the stale air. Then my outstretched hand felt something different. Not the muddy floor of the tunnel, but the edge where it opened into the larger passage beyond. With a final push, I dragged myself out of the letterbox into the slightly more open space of the connecting passage. I lay there for several minutes, gasping for breath, covered head to toe in cold mud. I'd made it through, but I was still deep in the cave, without light, and weakened from days of deprivation. Feeling around in the darkness, I located my pack and rifled through it, hoping against hope that I had overlooked some source of light. Nothing. I was going to have to find my way out by touch alone, following the wall of the passage, hoping I remembered the route correctly. I began moving slowly, keeping one hand on the wall at all times. The passage here was wide enough to walk upright, but I had no way to see obstacles or drop-offs. Every step was a potential disaster. Time lost all meaning as I shuffled through the darkness. Had I been moving for minutes or hours? Was I even heading in the right direction? Doubt crept in, feeding the panic that constantly threatened to overwhelm me. Then something changed. A subtle shift in the air. It felt fresher, slightly warmer. I paused, turning my face toward what I thought was the direction of the movement. Yes, definitely airflow. And with it, a sound. Not the rushing of underground water, but something else. Something rhythmic. Voices? "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking from disuse and dehydration. "Is someone there?" Silence, then, like a miracle. "Hello? Who's there?" A human voice, not my imagination. Someone else was in the cave. "Help!" I shouted, my voice stronger now with sudden hope. "I'm lost. My light died." The voices grew louder, excited. Then, the most beautiful sight in the world. A beam of light cutting through the darkness, bouncing off the cave walls, finding me mud-covered and squinting against the sudden brightness. 3 figures in caving gear materialized from around a bend in the passage. Their headlamps were blinding after my days in darkness. "Mark C?" one of them asked incredulously. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "My God," said another. "We've been searching for 3 days. Everyone thought you were dead." They quickly assessed my condition, giving me water and energy gel from their packs. One wrapped a thermal blanket around my shoulders, while another radioed to a team outside that they had found me alive. "How did you know where to look?" I asked once I could speak again. The lead rescuer, his name tag read in Wilson, smiled. Your notes. A surveying team found one yesterday wedged in a surface fissure almost half a mile from here. Plus, your car at the trailhead was reported when the park closed Monday evening. We've had teams in every accessible cave in the system since Tuesday. My desperate paper messages had actually worked. Someone had found them. The relief was so overwhelming, I nearly collapsed. The crack, it goes to the surface? I asked, still trying to process everything. Not directly, Wilson explained. There's a network of fissures that eventually connect to surface openings. Your notes got pulled through by air currents. Lucky break. Lucky didn't begin to cover it. The journey out was a blur. The rescue team had entered through a different access point than the one I'd used, and it took nearly 2 hours of careful navigation to reach the surface. Every step was agony in my weakened state. But the promise of daylight kept me moving. When we finally emerged from the cave entrance, I was unprepared for the sensory overload. The late afternoon sunlight seemed impossibly bright. The air smelled of soil and vegetation. The sound of birds and distant voices was overwhelming after days of near silence. A small crowd had gathered. Other rescue personnel, park rangers, even local news crews. An ambulance waited nearby, its red lights flashing silently. As they loaded me into the ambulance, a park ranger approached with my phone in a plastic bag. Found this in your car, she said. Thought you might want to let people know you're okay. The screen showed 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Word of my disappearance had obviously spread. At the hospital, they treated me for mild hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion, and the beginning stages of what appeared to be pneumonia. The doctors said I was extraordinarily lucky. Another day in those conditions, and the outcome would have been very different. My parents arrived the next morning, having driven straight through from Ohio. My father, always stoic, embraced me with tears in his eyes. My mother couldn't stop touching my face, as if confirming I was really there. Emma came too, our recent breakup suddenly insignificant in the face of what had happened. We talked for hours, perspective having a way of clarifying what really matters. News outlets wanted interviews. The cave rescue team visited to check on my recovery. My boss called to say my job was secure, take all the time I needed. But all I could think about was that moment in the absolute darkness when I had accepted that I might die there, alone and forgotten in the depths of the earth. How the world had narrowed to the sound of water and my own heartbeat. How I had promised myself that if I somehow survived, things would be different. It's been 6 months since what the local paper dubbed the Stillwater Miracle. I haven't gone caving again, though I don't rule it out for the future. The nightmares about rising water and absolute darkness have mostly subsided. I've developed almost comical habits about letting people know where I am and when I'll be back, but something fundamental has shifted in me. Near-death experiences are almost cliché in how they change people's outlooks. But clichés exist for a reason. In that cold, dark place, I confronted my mortality in a way few people do before old age forces the issue. The cave taught me what truly matters. Not the job I was stressed about, not the relationship I thought had broken me, not the daily annoyances we all fixate on. What matters is light when you're in darkness, warmth when you're freezing, the sound of another human voice when you've been alone with your thoughts for too long. And most importantly, when you think you're measuring your final hours, it's not the things you did that you remember, but the things you didn't do, the conversations you never had, the risks you never took, the love you never expressed. I walked into Stillwater Cave one person and emerged another. The darkness changed me. Or perhaps more accurately, it revealed me. stripped away everything but the essential truth of who I am and what I value.